you all, and thank you so much for joining us, Jeff and Meghan. Jeff, I wanted to start with you. You recently wrote for our site, thank you very much, about the third wave in education and training. What is the third wave?
So it's the wave that I think we're in right now. So if you think about major economic changes throughout the history of the United States and really the world, it's always been followed by major changes in education. So we think of the high school movement of the early 1900s, post the Industrial Revolution. We think of college for all and the real push in the 1960s to get more people a post-secondary education, which was the second wave. And now, excuse me, we're in this third wave, which is really kind of a reaction to the continuing churn of knowledge that's needed to keep up in any job. And that's this wave where you're going to need continual education throughout life. So we tend to talk about it as lifelong education. I don't think that's really the right term, because when we think of education, we think of something that happens in episodes, right? You go back to school, you're there for a year or 2 years or 4 years or whatever, and then you go back into the workforce. This, to me, is something that almost never ends, and it's continual upskilling.
Yeah. And Meghan, you are at the very forefront of this third wave. You're surfing it. You're now 2 years in?
Yes, I'm 2 years in.
2-year anniversary at Community College Rhode Island. So recently you started, I think you're coming to the end of your first full year in this program, Rhode Island Promise.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about that program and how it's gone.
Sure, would love to. So if any of you are familiar with Rhode Island politics, we have a long and storied past. I moved to Rhode Island. Look, we had a Senate president and a House speaker who were at loggerheads, so we had a budget that was not signed until August. That meant we had 30 days to implement our Promise program. We saw a 43% enrollment gain, so we went from 1,100 full-time students straight out of high school to 1,577 students. So, that was, we outperformed Tennessee, as you would all assume in the room. We're looking at Tennessee to sort of gauge our effectiveness. Tennessee saw about a 25% enrollment increase. We are right at finals for our second semester. We saw an 83% retention fall to spring, and one semester's worth of data shows that we have 240% more students on track to graduate in 2 years.
Wow. Part of that increase in Tennessee, and I know you can't speak to there, but there was also somewhat of a decline in four-year enrollments. And I'm curious, if I don't know that we've got enough data in Rhode Island yet to see how it affects matriculation to the four-year colleges, but from your perspective, would it be a weakness of the program if it did result in a decline in enrollment at 4 years, or is it all gravy to you?
As I said to Matt earlier, I run a two-year college, so that's where my focus is. But I'll say a couple of things beyond that. First, we have seen a very nominal sort of decrease that we can tie to the Promise. So very low double digits, less than 24 students. What I'll go on to say is, our Promise was the brainchild of our governor, Governor Raimondo, and her desire for the plan was 2 years anywhere. So either consume 2 years of education at the community college or pay for yourself for the first 2 years, either with us or at RIC or URI, and then access that 2 years at RIC or URI. For our state, like most states, it's a brand new concept. It was a big push to get it successfully through the legislature just for the community college. You and I were talking earlier, and I think I'll close simply by saying, when the governor called me about a year and a half ago to say, look, we're going to do this, I wisely first said thank you, but I then said, listen, I realize this is historic for Rhode Island. We're going to figure out how to make it successful, but, Governor, it's 10% of who we serve. It is 10% of who we serve. So, the upside to this program for our entire college is that it really, first of all, it's brought a spotlight to the work, which I welcome. I want it. I want a spotlight. The second is it's brought real urgency to making sure we drive these outcomes, and that's serving all of our students, not just the 10%. So what would I like to see? I'd like part-time students. I'd like adult students. And I'm very much supportive of how would we think about expanding it to Rhode Island College and the university.
Yeah. Jeff, you have written about, in addition to the third wave, you've written about the needs of the emerging emerging workforce, and I'm curious, do you worry at all that as we move towards a workforce where it's lifelong learning, folks constantly need to be attaining and improving their skills, that employers will have too much of a say, essentially, in determining what higher ed looks like for students, and that higher ed will, as a consequence, reduce its emphasis on the whole person and start sort of trying to funnel people.
Well, I think that this is an argument that's been going on for generations,
yes.
right?
This is not the first time this question.
Right, between kind of the practical arts and the liberal arts, and I think it's an argument that kind of needs to die because it's both. It's both and in fact, when you talk to employers, they want the so-called soft skills of the liberal arts, right? They want people who can think, who can write. You know, the number one job requirement in almost every job and every employer complains about is how graduates can't write. They want people who can problem solve, work in teams. The ability to navigate ambiguity is incredibly important given what's happening to the workforce. So those are all skills, I think, of a great liberal arts education. At the same time, we know that just those skills alone don't work in this economy where jobs, again, are changing so quickly. So you also need kind of those practical arts skills as well. So I think it's both and. Now, parents are increasingly and students are increasingly worried about getting a job after college, right? So it used to be, UCLA does a survey of first-year students every year. Going back to the 1960s, it used to be the number one reason to go to college was to learn something. Back in 2008, that switched, and now it's to get a job. And I think a lot of this ties into the affordability argument. I think that as college has become more expensive, students and parents are looking for the ROI on it.
Yeah. Meghan, you, in a story from the Providence Journal, you said the community college is not a destination, it's a bridge. What is it a bridge to in your mind? And do you think that four-year colleges should think of themselves the same way?
So I'll take the first question first. When you talked about the second wave of education, that was the birth of community colleges. My college was founded in 1966. I was born in 1966. That was about access. So community colleges were assessed for how wide open were our doors, and did we admit everyone who sought entry? And that's shifted. It started shifting about 20 years ago to a completion agenda. I believe in that agenda. So when I gave that quote, it was about, I don't believe we should be judging ourselves a success any longer for simply opening the door. We're not a destination. We should be judged by, are we graduating our students? Are they finding quality employment? And are the ones who desire to transfer to a four-year first successfully transferring in a cost-efficient and time-effective way? And are they actually graduating? I mean, I'm barely, 2 years in. Down the road, we should be evaluated on not just are they transferring, are they graduating from those four-year schools? And regarding your second question, I'll default to, look, I'm a brand new community college president, but I am a parent of 2 children who are in four-year schools. It better be a bridge somewhere.
Do you feel like in Rhode Island you're getting the partnership from your four-year institutions that you would ideally have? We
really are, and it's one of, I think, the unanticipated positive outcomes of the Promise launch, where, look, you know the higher ed space. Around the country, with very few exceptions, we're all seeing enrollment declines, right? In our case, we saw that 43% enrollment increase in that segment, which drove about a 2% enrollment increase over what we would otherwise have anticipated. So URI and Rhode Island College are now looking at us and saying, we better figure out how to sort of set aside what I regard as sort of calcified ideas about what community college students can do, what community college faculty can do, and start actually genuinely thinking about designing effective transfer pathways like, Nova and George Mason has, like Valencia and Florida State has, like Maricopa and Arizona, like so many around the country. We are playing catch up in many ways in Rhode Island, and I think Promise has helped light a fire underneath the three of us to figure that out quickly.
And I think what happens now, given the economic pressures facing most higher education institutions, is they move in one of two directions. They either do that and they cooperate more with each other, or they kind of put their heads down and they kind of defend their turf. And so in some cases, I think the cooperation people move into their silos and they say, these are our students, we're not going to, cooperate, publics, privates, 2-year colleges, 4-year colleges, elite colleges, non-elite colleges.
Yeah. Let's talk for a moment about adults and workforce retraining. Jeff, you reported an interesting picture in Des Moines. I hope you can talk about that a little bit. I recently finished the book Janesville by Amy Goldstein, which I recommend to the group. Part of, she traces the 5 years in Janesville, Wisconsin from the closure of a GM factory there, and follows the paths of many of the workers who had been employed at that factory, including a couple who went to Blackhawk Technical College after losing their jobs to gain new skills to transition into different fields where there were jobs. And the picture that she found in partnering with researchers from the University of Wisconsin wasn't an incredibly pretty one. She found the workers, by and large, ended up worse off after this jump to attain their associate's degrees than several of their peers who went right back into lower paying, lower skilled jobs in the city. What do you think, how do we avoid that?
Well, we kind of have to rethink what we're offering, right? So I did a piece a couple months back for The Atlantic, and I looked at what happened to the Maytag workers in Iowa when Maytag basically was sold to Whirlpool and they shut down the factory there. And there was a lot of money. President Obama went there. There was a lot of federal and state money pouring into that. Into Newton, Iowa. And what they found was that many of these people had, never gone to college. If they had gone to college, they didn't finish in many cases. And they were all in their 40s and 50s. And so school to them was 20 years earlier. And so what happened was they put all this money to have them go back to a place like Des Moines Area Community College, but then they put them into a traditional associate's degree, right? And they had to go to school, they had to kind of get back into the rhythm of a school. Meanwhile, they had families, they had kids, they had all these other worries. And again, they hadn't been in a classroom, and they probably didn't succeed in those classrooms 20 years earlier. So why now put them in a classroom? And so what ended up happening was most of these students ended up not getting any sort of degree, and they ended up worse off. So what the state of Iowa did was they put more money into non-credit courses that they worked very closely with, and non-credit classes, I should say, that they worked very closely with employers in the area. And they said, what do you need, right? What are the skills you need? And then they broke those skills down into smaller chunks. And they said, okay, you're going to take this class. It might only be 6 days, but that's going to get you into a job, in which case then you're going to take another class that might be 12 days. These are all non-credit courses, so the stakes are a little bit lower, and then you could come back and get credit later on and eventually get a degree. But the key here is that it gets them into a job sooner rather than a 2-year promise of a job might be there. That's where I think we need to change.
Yeah, I would just say what he said. And we have two examples. So we have a brand new VP, Julian Alcid, who was Chief Workforce Strategist for College for America. And Jeff's idea is exactly what Julian has come into the college to help us figure out. So the two examples I would cite, one is with General Dynamics. And it's about that short-term training, just targeted, what do you need right now? I think the second learning I've had coming into the 2-year space for the first time is the non-credit space is where you can do it right now, and you can be creative and adaptive and flexible and fast. And for me, the goal is going to be, until our employers decide they no longer care about a certificate or a degree, I'm going to work to get it. But we'll go back and do that with PLA and sort of going through the assessment and accreditation. So we've trained 700 workers for electric boat in the last year, and we've done a CNC quick boot camp for our advanced manufacturing consortium in Rhode Island. And they've all been hired, right? I mean, so we're seeing that it works. I think we have a lot of work to do in that returning adult learning space, and it's going to be about teaching to them and sort of making the college work for them, as opposed to asking them to sort of fit their lives into the structure of a traditional college.
If you succeed in your wildest dreams at CCRI, what will it look like in 10 years? How will it be different from the way it is today?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I can honestly say boy, is that easy for me to answer. So if you're in the community college space, and I say this with respect to everyone who really thinks about the 2-year rate, I don't really think about the 2-year rate. That's a rounding error. That's not who I serve. I serve adult learners, 90%, part-time students, 90% or 70%. So what do I want? I want one of the best graduation rates in the United States, and I want those to lead to high quality careers where they can continue to grow. I want us to be actually the workforce development engine that we are set up to be in Rhode Island, and that I believe we can become. So we're at 18% right now. That's about depending on whether you think it's 22 or 25% for a 3-year rate. With Rhode Island Promise, to circle back to that quickly, when I look at our trend line, if we can hold that line and actually get the second year of funding and then keep those students, I believe we will either double that 3-year rate 2 years from now or come within spitting distance. So, we just got to hold the line and keep going.
In another moment, I'm going to come to y'all for questions, but first I'm going to troll Jeff for a second. Do you think that the 4-year degree is on its way towards obsolescence, or is it going to be as relevant in that same 10-year horizon as
No. I think that most employers still think of a degree, and particularly the 4-year degree, as a signaling a device, and it still is the strongest signal in my mind.
A signaling device. That's such harsh praise.
Well, but there's a lot of noise around that signal, but it's still the strongest signal that somebody is kind of job ready. And I think for most employers, it's that they completed something. But there's a lot of changes happening. And Atlantic has done a lot of work on this idea of people analytics, that employers are now looking backwards at their best employees and trying to figure out where they came from, what they majored in, and all these other things. So I think there's all these other factors beyond the piece of paper that are going to be critically important in the future. But I still think, at least for the next 10 years, I don't think we're going to see any change at the bachelor's level. If we see change anywhere, I think it's going to be at the master's level and the professional level.
Got it. I'm going to take that as a no, but I wish. All right, so if we can bring a mic to tell. We got someone in the back here, and if you could just identify yourself.
I'm Romain Deveau from the Higher Education Department of the Embassy of France. From the recent figures, 2017 Open Doors figures, community colleges represent a really small number of study abroad students. Do you think study abroad could be a way for community college to look ahead in the future?
So I love the question because I believe my students have the same right to do that so many 4-year students do. So what you and I need to put our heads together is, how do we figure out how we pay for it? And I think that would require the federal government in this country to figure out that it values that and it wants to promote it and really invest in it as a strategy. But I think it's essential in terms of what the world is becoming, and allowing our students to have that opportunity, I think is a good idea.
Yeah. All right, I'll take one more up here. And if you would just identify yourself, sir.
Hank Wallace of Write and Speak Like the News. Well, formalize Matt's question. Will there be a 4th wave? And Meghan, will you be ready for it?
So, I said right before we walked on, and I've heard others as I've sort of dipped in and out today, I think we are seeing one of the greatest disruptions in higher ed, certainly in my lifetime. So the short answer is we better be ready, and my team and I and our faculty and staff are thinking about it all day, every day, how we get ready. I do think increasingly, this debate about, do employers get a say? Should employers be at the table? I think when I think about the students I serve, they're coming to the college for 2 reasons. They're coming because they're curious and they want to learn something. But the second reason they're coming, they want to create a better life for themselves and for their families. And you know what that means still in this country? A job, and a good job. So I don't think we have the answers yet. I think we're right in the middle of figuring it out. I think it's going to take a team of people to do it. And I think it is certainly going to take everybody coming to the table and agreeing what at least we experienced as consumers of higher education. Those days are either already gone or they're quickly disappearing. And so we're going to absolutely have to just jump in, try some things, be bold, and move forward.
I think we will, and I doubt it will be another 60-year period between the first, second, and the second and third. And I think probably what will push it is artificial intelligence. And the disappearance of jobs that might come because of artificial intelligence, and then how do we prepare people to kind of complement technology rather than try to compete with it. So that if there is a fourth wave, that probably will be, it'll be focused in that area.
So my last question for you, Meghan, how do we mitigate against the possibility that the workforce that we're creating, this lifelong learning, upskilling workforce, is geared for affluent people with the time and resources to develop new skills?
No, I will tell you, I think about this a lot. And I think there is a lot of energy behind convincing the students I serve that a certificate or an associate degree is just fine for them. So we have a goal of 70% of all Rhode Islanders to have some form of post-secondary credential degree by 2025. And I keep standing up, and it depends on the room, how it's received, and saying, listen, when our employers tell me they no longer care about a BA, then I don't care anymore. But for as long as American employers say they care about that BA, that signaling, then I am going to advocate to make sure that that gap that you're describing doesn't widen. So I'm focusing on a degree, but I think unless, again, we really have a laser focus on equity, I don't see that gap closing, and so we really have to stay focused on it.
Meghan, Jeff, thank you very much, and thanks to all of you.